On the same day that a Vietnamese newspaper called Laodong, which translates simply as labor, ran a front-page story about Britain recording its hottest month in history, at least 16 people in India had already died from heat stroke. Simultaneously, France was placing 8 of its western regions under emergency heat wave alert. Spain was bracing for 38 degrees Celsius. Italy had banned outdoor labor. Germany was breaking daily May temperature records across dozens of weather stations. And a 10-year-old girl, standing on the banks of the Thames in London, told a reporter that it felt like a mini version of hell. The fact that a newspaper in Vietnam, a country that knows heat, that lives with tropical temperatures as a basic reality of daily existence, found Britain's May 2026 weather significant enough to lead with is itself a data point worth sitting with. When the tropical world looks at what is happening in a temperate island nation and treats it as alarming news, something has shifted. Not slightly, fundamentally. May 2026 is now confirmed as the hottest May in the history of the United Kingdom's meteorological record, a record that stretches back to 1884, and that has accumulated 142 years of temperature data across every season. The provisional statistics published by the Met Office place May 2026 at the top of that entire historical column for average monthly temperatures, for peak daily maxima, and for the number of days exceeding temperature thresholds that previously belonged to July and August. The headline numbers from the month are by now widely reported, but deserve to be assembled in one place because their cumulative weight is different from any individual figure. On May 1st, Kew Gardens in southwest London reached 29.3 degrees Celsius, shattering the previous record for the first day of May, set in Lossiemouth, Scotland in 1990. That record stood for 36 years. It lasted until the next chapter of the same month arrived. On May 23rd, Britain recorded its earliest 30-degree reading since 1952, the first time in 74 years that temperatures crossed that threshold so early in the calendar year. On May 24th, the UK recorded its hottest May day in at least 79 years, with Kew Gardens hitting 32.3 degrees Celsius in initial readings. On May 25th, Kew Gardens broke its own reading from the day before with a provisional 34.8 degrees Celsius, shattering the previous all-time UK May record of 32.8 degrees set in 1944 by a full 2 degrees. On May 26th, provisional readings of 35 degrees Celsius in London broke the record again, less than 24 hours after it had first fallen. The UK broke its all-time May temperature record twice in consecutive days at the end of a month that had already broken multiple other May records in its first week. The mechanism behind May 2026's record destruction has been described in technical terms throughout the coverage of this event, but the human translation of what an African plume heat dome actually means for people living through it matters as much as the atmospheric physics. The heat dome that sat over Western Europe through the final week of May was, in the language of the Severe Weather Europe analysis, the strongest heat dome so far in 2026, delivering midsummer heat to millions of people well ahead of schedule with temperatures soaring 12 to 16 degrees Celsius above long-term climatological norms. A 16-degree anomaly above a seasonal average is not a weather event in any conventional sense. The seasonal average for late May in London is approximately 18 degrees Celsius. Adding 16 degrees to that produces 34 degrees. That arithmetic tells the story more plainly than any atmospheric technical description. Britain, in the last week of May 2026, was experiencing temperatures that its climate considers typical for its hottest fortnight of the year, arriving 6 to 8 weeks ahead of schedule, on a foundation of background warming that made the already extraordinary peak values even more extreme than equivalent atmospheric patterns would have produced in any previous decade. The global dimension of what May 2026 represents is where the Laodong story connects to something larger than a single country's record books. Britain is one data point in a planetary pattern. The month of May 2026 did not produce historic heat only over the United Kingdom. Weather stations across Germany, France, Ireland, the Benelux region, and the United Kingdom shattered daily temperature records across the bank holiday weekend simultaneously. Charts released by meteorologists showed station after station breaking previous May 24th records, with the pink markers on weather maps representing previous record highs, overtaken almost everywhere beneath the expanding plume of heat. In some places, roads shimmered under the afternoon sun, while dry air rippled above rooftops. In others, people crowded beneath trees and fountains, searching for relief from temperatures that arrived weeks ahead of schedule. France experienced its hottest May day on record. Ireland recorded its highest May temperatures in history. Germany broke daily May records across dozens of stations. All of this happened on the same weekend, driven by the same heat dome, representing a synchronized continental temperature extreme that has no precedent in the observational record for the month of May. India's simultaneous crisis adds a dimension to the global warning that the British and European coverage of the bank holiday heatwave largely omitted. While 16 people had died from heat stroke in India as of May 24th, the full scale of India's heat emergency in May 2026 was substantially larger than that headline figure suggested. India's pre-monsoon heat season, the period between March and the arrival of the monsoon in June and July, has been intensifying progressively over the past decade. The Indian Meteorological Department has documented an increase in the frequency, duration, and geographic extent of heatwave events across the subcontinent over this period, with the northwest and central regions most severely affected. A country of 1.4 billion people, the majority of whom work outdoors or in unventilated structures with a healthcare system that struggles to manage normal seasonal demand, faces a qualitatively different set of heat risks than Britain or France. The deaths from heat stroke that Indian health officials were recording on May 24th, while British holidaymakers were crowding beaches in 32-degree warmth, are the same climate signal expressed in a different social and economic context. The heat dome over Europe and the heat. Emergency in India are not separate weather stories. They are simultaneous expressions of a global climate system in which May is no longer the mild transitional month it was designed to be in either a temperate or a monsoon climate. The World Meteorological Organization's position on what is driving this global pattern of simultaneous May 2026 extremes connects all of these individual national data points to the same root cause. The WMO confirmed in its most recent update that 2026 has an above-average probability of becoming one of the hottest years in the global temperature record, driven by the combination of long-term greenhouse gas warming and the developing El Niño event in the Pacific. The organization's seasonal temperature outlook for the April to June 2026 period specifically identified above normal temperature probability for virtually every region of the inhabited world: Europe, South Asia, East Asia, Africa, North America, and South America simultaneously. That geographic comprehensiveness is the WMO's way of communicating something that the month of May has just illustrated with data. The background warming of the global climate system has elevated the baseline from which every heat event now begins, such that even moderately anomalous atmospheric circulation patterns produce record-breaking temperatures because the floor has risen. The heat dome over Western Europe was not, by the standards of past atmospheric circulation variability, an exceptionally rare or unusual configuration. Heat domes form over Europe regularly during the warmer months. What made the May 2026 event different was not the atmospheric setup, it was the temperature of the air that setup was working with. That air was warmer than it would have been in any previous decade, carrying the thermal signature of decades of accumulated greenhouse gas emissions, and the records it produced reflected that accumulated legacy precisely. The Climate Change Committee's timing in publishing its landmark report on May 20th, just 3 days before the heat wave's most extreme phase began, now looks less like coincidence and more like an unusually well-timed piece of institutional communication. The committee's central finding, that the United Kingdom was built for a climate that no longer exists, was illustrated with stunning directness by the events of the following 6 days. A report warning that 92% of UK homes could overheat by mid-century was published on a Tuesday. By the following Sunday, Kew Gardens was recording 34.8 degrees Celsius in late May. By Monday, it had reached 35 degrees. The gap between the committee's projection of extreme heat becoming a regular feature of British summers by 2050 and the actual weather of the last week of May 2026 is not 24 years. It is 3 days. The committee projected the direction. The atmosphere delivered a preview of the destination. The specific warning embedded in May 2026's record destruction goes beyond the immediate human and health consequences of the heat wave itself. It is a warning about the seasonal structure of climate risk in a warming world. For decades, British emergency planning, public health systems, agriculture, and infrastructure management have been calibrated around a seasonal model in which winter produces cold and flooding risk, spring is mild and transitional, summer produces occasional warm spells with peak heat in late July and early August, and autumn returns to cool and wet. The May 2026 event breaks that model at its most fundamental level. It places record-challenging heat in the month that sits between spring and summer, the month that in the British calendar serves as the preparation window for summer risk management. The heat arrived before the preparation was complete. It arrived before the RNLI had full lifeguard deployment at all beaches. It arrived before the NHS had completed its heat wave response mobilization. It arrived before schools had implemented their summer heat protocols. It arrived in buildings that had their winter heating on 2 weeks previously and had not yet had their windows reconfigured for summer ventilation management. The timing is not incidental to the danger. It is central to it. The health consequences of May 2026's record month are still being tallied and will not be fully known for weeks or months. The London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine has developed models for estimating heat-related excess mortality from sustained high temperatures and UKHSA alert data. During the 2022 heat wave, which reached 40.3 degrees Celsius at its peak, but was concentrated into a shorter extreme period than May 2026's 9-day event, approximately 4,500 excess deaths were recorded in England attributable to the heat, with London contributing the largest single geographic share at 129 projected fatalities in the 4-day peak window alone. The May 2026 event sustained amber heat health alerts across 8 UKHSA regions for multiple consecutive days, in buildings that had not been operated in heat management mode, in a population that was psychologically in for a country built for a climate that no longer exists. That story will be measured in individual deaths. Elderly people in unventilated rooms, people with cardiovascular conditions whose medications impair thermoregulation, young children in cars and classrooms, whose names will not appear in weather records, but whose deaths are as much a product of May 2026's climate as the 35-degree reading at Kew Gardens. The agricultural damage from the month is also still being assessed. A dry April, followed by the warmest May in recorded history, has created a soil moisture deficit across southern and eastern England that entering June represents one of the most significant early summer drought starts since the severe drought years of 2022. Winter wheat, spring barley, sugar beet, and the soft fruit crops that define the economic calendar of many southeastern farming counties have all been stressed by the combination of the May 12-13 Arctic blasts frost impact and the subsequent heat of the bank holiday heat wave. Farmers who managed the frost damage found themselves managing heat and drought stress within the same fortnight, a compressive sequence of weather-driven agricultural challenges with no historical parallel in the modern farming record. The economic cost of May 2026's record heat is a dimension that will take months to fully calculate, but whose early indicators are already visible. The insurance industry's early loss assessment models have been updated multiple times during the bank holiday period. The structural economic argument for adaptation, £11 billion per year as the Climate Change Committee recommended, versus £60 billion per year in current damage costs, is now supported by May 2026 data that demonstrates precisely the damage category that investment is designed to prevent. A Vietnamese newspaper covered Britain's hottest month in history because May 2026's weather is not a local story. It is a chapter in a global narrative that every country on Earth has a stake in different ways and at different levels of immediate physical risk. Britain's record temperatures matter to Vietnam, not because Vietnamese people are concerned about British beach crowds or railway speed restrictions or NHS heat alerts. They matter because the same physics that put 35 degrees Celsius on a thermometer at Kew Gardens in May is the same physics driving the intensification of monsoon disruption, drought, and extreme heat across South and Southeast Asia. The heat dome over Western Europe and the heat stroke deaths in India and the earliest 30-degree reading in Britain since 1952 are not separate events requiring separate explanations. They are one event with one explanation, expressing itself differently across different geographies, different infrastructures, and different populations. The hottest month in UK history is a data point in that single story. What it is telling us, in numbers that can no longer be described as unexpected or unprecedented by anyone who has been paying attention, is that the climate the world built its civilization for is gone. What is here now, and building towards something more extreme still, is what comes next.